PodSaaS, where we're putting the SaaS back in sassy. Sponsored by Leader Pro, where you can book demos with target customers on demand and fill your sales pipeline instantly.
Hey everybody, welcome to another episode of PodSaaS. I am your host, Chris Sheng, and today we are joined by Charles from MarketMuse. Well, before we jump into what we like to do, which is like a series of rapid fire questions, again, just to get to know Charles as an individual, as a human being, get to know you better and your journey, because that's really what's most interesting here. Tell us a little bit about MarketMuse. Like, just what is the quick elevator pitch, and then who really makes a great customer or is a great fit for your product?
One of the things that was most attractive to me when I was considering joining MarketMuse is it's not bound to any particular industry. Any company that is producing content, organic content at scale, is a company for which we can deliver value. Now, we certainly have verticals such as tech, retail, financial services, where we've had a lot of success. I would say most notably the publishing or media industry, because if you start talking about creating content at scale, publishers create content at massive scale. And that ability to provide that prescriptive guidance to them as to what they should be writing about and in what depth is something they find particularly valuable. Taking that ICP from a company type to an individual type, our clients are, content strategists, content marketers, leaders of marketing, SEO professionals, anybody that's involved and whose success is tied to the creation of content and the performance of content is an individual we can help.
Okay, perfect. Got it. Awesome. Before we kind of get into, the origination of MarketMuse and then also your role within MarketMuse, because from my understanding, you are somebody who was hired originally in a sales role and then into a revenue role, and then ultimately graduated into the CEO role. So not necessarily a founder, but it's definitely somebody who still has had the domain experience and expertise working your way through those rankings to become the CEO, which is one of the journeys that we do speak about here. And we've had at least a handful of individuals that have come on here that are not necessarily like original founders, but they have a very unique story of how they ended up in that CEO role. So especially for startups, I feel like that journey is equally exciting and original in a lot of cases in terms of like how they get there. So let's dive into a little bit. But before that, happy to jump into these questions if you're ready to do it.
Yeah, let's go.
Cool. First one's really easy. So just, do you have a favorite entrepreneur and or a startup story?
I do. Steve Jobs.
Okay.
And the reason I mention him is because I think the most valuable skill any of us can have is the gift of introspection. To look in the mirror and see not what you want to see, but what's really there. And when you look at Steve, here's a guy that got kicked out of the company that he'd founded. And instead of, looking at that circumstance and pointing fingers and blaming others for, political manipulation and circumstance, he dug in, got better at himself, got better as a professional, and earned an opportunity to regain control of the company. And I just think that's it's inspirational. It speaks to trying to get better every day.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I mean, I love that. I love that part of the story. Selfishly, I often wonder, like, what were his driving motivators, right, to get better, like to be better. I think everybody has like different things that fuel them. And that's like a big pivotal moment as a part of his career of like, and I think like maybe even to a certain degree that the moment he got kicked out, he was already probably the gears were turning as to what do I need to do to regain, not just regain control, but like take it to a place and finish the vision of what he had maybe initially had, or maybe that being let go too actually helped shapeshift a bigger vision than he even originally had into something more than what we see it today.
Really well said. Couldn't agree more.
Yeah, I mean, those are like the human elements, right? It's like we are all motivated, inspired, triggered by different things, and I'm just curious. It's like we see at least on the surface level like what he was able to do, and we can maybe philosophize around what that potentially could be. But then there's like when we look at ourselves and when we're in that mirror, and it's like what's pushing us. Everybody has unique motivators, which actually we're going to get into right now, which is starting a business, running a business. It requires a lot of different skill sets, and you go through a lot of different ups and downs, right? So I'm curious as to what motivates you in that 25th hour, right? Where your back's against the wall, you're having to make really, really tough decisions, or you're in a stuck or holding pattern. What is getting you to move forward?
Yeah. And this is and I'll have to dive in to explain, but doing the right thing the right way. I have seen in so many, the benefit of 58 years on this planet.
Yeah.
I've seen a lot of people, and I've been a lot of places where, people talk about values, and then and traits that they aspire to or claim to live by, like character and integrity, what have you. And what you more often than not see is that those values are really easy to adhere to when things are going well. But when things aren't going well, all of a sudden compromises are made. There's a quote, and I was watching a webcast this morning, and it talked about a quote that might not actually be Teddy Roosevelt's, but it's attributed to him.
Okay.
And it talks about decision making.
Yeah.
And it talks about when you have to make a decision, the best decision is the right thing to do. The second best decision is the wrong thing to do. But the worst thing you can do is do nothing. I am never going to claim that I made all the right decisions. But I will claim intent to do the right things the right way and act at all times in a way that's consistent with my values, whether that's the easy thing to do at any given moment or it's not.
When you said values, I mean, the first thing that came to my mind was going back to the Steve Jobs thing. And when we talk about motivators, things that push you in the 25th hour, like I wonder, it's just running through my mind, but I wonder like how much of the fact that he was, adopted, right? Like plays into the psychology of how hard and he pushed, or what was he trying to prove, or what was that chip on his shoulder? But in any case, diverting a little bit there, it does take me to another question, which we have on our list, which is most painful experience. And I'll put this in context, which is I think like a lot of exponential growth, whether personal or professional, typically comes from being in a very uncomfortable situation. And that's where you get like your most, to me, and I think a lot of the other entrepreneurs I've spoken to here, that's where their most creative problem solving comes in, is in those types of situations. So is there anything that you can speak to either personally or professionally again that you went through that maybe at that moment in time was very, very difficult or very trying on you, but provided so much perspective later on, and or it could be possibly what's inspiring you day to day?
I think the most difficult experience I've had as a leader and as a CEO was a couple months into the pandemic. We had doubled revenues in 2019. We had plans to do the same in 2020. Got off to a great start, and then second week of March happened, and a lot of people's worlds turned upside down. And for a company that is selling into marketing, I mean, as we know, marketing spend everywhere pretty much ground to a halt. And when I moved into this role, it was after 6 months roughly of maintaining our OpEx while being way off of our revenue targets. So the first thing that we had to do was dramatically reduce the costs of the business. And that meant letting a lot of really good people, hard workers that were passionate about what they did and passionate about doing it at MarketMuse, letting those folks go.
Yeah.
Firing people is never fun.
Yeah.
But if you do it right, it shouldn't be a surprise. And certainly, ownership or accountability for that end result, rests with the individual that's been let go. But in these cases, letting folks go, who aspired to your ideals of what a MarketMuse employee should be, and doing so knowingly you're impacting their ability to provide for their family at a very difficult economic time, and basically call after call for an entire day. That's something that should stay with you.
Yeah.
And it did with me.
And how do you feel like that shifted your thinking now today, right? Like maybe 2 years later.
And great question. And really what it comes down to is the discipline and pragmatism involved in rescaling the company. Instead of what I'm sure I would have done without that experience, saying, okay, we revenues are accelerating, let's go ahead and hire again. We have been very deliberate about doing it. Because what I don't want to have happen is to be in a situation where, we're hiring folks prematurely, and in doing so inadvertently putting ourselves in a position where we'd ever have to do that again.
Yeah, there's something I have seen a lot of companies deal with, as a result of the pandemic, which is having to go through trimming a lot of the fat that was there. Not to say it's about the quality of the people or the intent of those people, but at the end of the day, it's like there is running a business is built on numbers to a certain degree, right? Which is hard to justify if you can't fill the top line. Especially if you're in these crazy circumstances. In those moments of, stress and struggle and it can wear and tear on your mental health too. Like, is there anything that you go to personally like decompress from all that kind of stuff? Like for me, I know I go to fitness, I do running and things like that. And there's a lot of other people have different types of outlets, but I feel like that's just as important for maintaining, especially in the CEO roles, as a founder role, like the grind of the day in, day outs to have something that you go to.
Yeah, I think there's two things that I go to that are impactful for me on a daily basis. The first is what you just mentioned, fitness. I used to play sports as if I were indestructible, and I'm 58, and I found out about 10 years ago, surprise, surprise, that I'm not indestructible. And my days of running up and down a basketball court or running on pavement are done. So I cycle a lot, and it's something I've really come to enjoy, and it's not weight bearing. And also strength training. Like I said, I'm 58, and I can't stop aging, but I can slow the impact of it down, and I want to be around. So that's something that's a daily part of my life. The other thing, which is actually more impactful, is mindfulness. It's something I actually picked up through one of my sons a couple years ago, and it's been life altering. The basic tenets of mindfulness, such as non-judgmental observation, non-reactionary behavior, self-care. I could go on and on and on, but it has made me a better husband, a better father, a better leader, a better CEO. And there is very rarely a day that goes by where I don't find a way to block off 15 to 20 minutes and engage in that practice.
That's beautiful. Curious as to how did your son teach you that, or what was the process of that?
Yeah, it was actually really neat. My wife and I thought we were empty nesters in the fall of 2019.
Okay.
And then the pandemic happened, and all of a sudden our house was full again. And when I say full, I mean it's a blended. We have a blended family, 6 kids.
Okay.
Now 5 boys between 25 and 22, and a 20-year-old girl. Mm-hmm. And everybody came back home, which was an absolute blessing. And one morning I walked out onto our sun porch, and my stepson Chad was sitting very quietly by himself. And when he got done, I asked him what he was doing, and he's like, Chuck, this is it's mindfulness. I've been doing these meditations for a couple months. It's amazing. And I think when I did my meditation this morning, when I say it's a daily part of my life, I think now, I've been doing it for over 2 years, like something like 675 different sessions. And it's just, I'm so thankful to have found it.
Yeah, I agree. I practice that too daily, at least 15, 20, if not usually 30 minutes, but depending on the day, first thing to do in the mornings. And these are the small things. I feel like when people talk about life hacks and how do you become a better person, or how do you become better at whatever it is that you do, whether it's a CEO, or just whatever you're going up and waking up to challenge yourself in the day. Like, these are the little things that we pick up on in life that I don't think everybody realizes the importance of them all the time. Obviously, you lived however many years before you picked it up a couple of years ago, right? Like I picked it up maybe again, same thing around, 2-3 years ago. But lived so much of my life without practicing these things. And it does enrich, and it's almost like, I don't know about you, but the level of awareness and growth has been exponential since picking some of these small things up that the very beginning, you're just like, oh, this feels a little hokey. And then you're going through it, and just repetition and consistency. It just, lo and behold, you look back like 6 months later, or a year later, or a year and a half later. And if you have if you center yourself and you see like what's actually changed tangibly in your life, that's changed, it's sometimes pretty amazing to see how far it's grown.
I agree. When I try to summarize it for folks, what I talk about is that what that practice has done for me is it creates space. Mm-hmm. I think I can look back at every mistake, every screw up I've had in my life, and I've had a ton. Yeah. And it was typically because when I was under stress or managing through a difficult situation, things sped up. Mm-hmm. I let things speed up, and I reacted to things without thought and consideration. And I feel like what meditation does for me more than anything is create space for me to consider, to evaluate, and decide on what the best path forward is. Yeah. It's not perfect. You can slip into old habits from time to time. Yeah. But it's been invaluable.
Yeah. Yeah. No, I agree 1,000%. I mean, if you can cut out 90% of the BS of your life, pre that exercise, right? I think that's a pretty big win. And I think it just makes you I think it's a huge part of being a great leader. Like, that mindfulness is really, really important. And I'd say at least 90% of the people that I've talked to, we've had some semblance of that conversation, and they all practice some version of that. And they've had some moment where it's provided the impetus for that way of thinking. But that's, a lot of times that's what's creating them to be a great leader. And that said, as a CEO, you coming from a sales background is one thing, but then as a CEO, it's a lot of different things, right? It's a lot of different challenges, and it's not just hitting numbers, it's not hitting quotas, but it's primarily managing people and personalities to a certain degree, right? And, what has been one of the skill sets that you picked up as a CEO, because I'm sure you've worn a lot of hats, things that you thought you'd like, things that you picked up that you didn't like as much, but have you had a love-hate relationship with any new skill set that you've picked up as a CEO? It could be love or hate or both, but something that you've had a strong like emotional disposition towards.
Yeah, I mean, I guess I'll start trying to answer that question by acknowledging that I've still got so much to learn about this job and about leadership and about so many different things. But I'm a much better CEO now, 18 months into the job than I was 3 months ago, and 3 months before that, and 3 months before that. And what I think I've learned, and I'm going to pull us back to meditation for a second, is one other key tenet, which is impermanence. Which is no matter how good something is, no matter how bad something is in a given moment, no matter, a challenging personality, a difficult issue, a hard meeting, a conversation you don't want to have that you've got to have, whatever it is, what I think I've improved the most at during this time is to just deal with it, because I have an understanding that no matter how difficult it is, I get through it. I make the best evaluation, the best judgment I can, and then I move on to the next thing. I feel like you have to be that way in this job, because the next thing is always there. And if you're carrying 2 or 3 different difficult situations and judgments and regrets, and you're going into the next thing with that on you, you're not going to perform anywhere near your best. So it's understanding impermanence, making the call, letting go, and moving on to the next thing.
Absolutely. That's funny you say that, because it was just, I think last week I was watching an actors roundtable, and Tom Hanks said something that the question was, what piece of advice would you give your younger self? And Tom Hanks said, "This too shall pass." And the reference was that no matter how great things are going, that's going to pass. No matter how bad things are going, it's going to pass. And it's just really kind of like keeping, that steady state of just knowing that no matter whatever challenge, no matter how hard you feel this challenge is today, tomorrow is going to be a different story. Next week will be a different story. Next month will be a completely different story. And it's just, and I think with that mindset too, it's like it helps a lot with just setting things into perspective in a way that allows you to tackle things and not feel overwhelmed. Whereas I think the majority of people might just tend to go into it. And again, like you're talking about before, your older version of yourself being more reactionary, as opposed to being more present-minded and having that context. Last question here, because I think it's an important one, before we just jump into your story of how you ended up at MarketMuse, but it's the idea of legacy and the impact that you want to leave on this planet before you leave it, right? And I know you have a family, so sometimes it's more personally driven, sometimes it's more professionally driven, but what is that idea for you, and have you thought much about it?
I think I am at the age where you start thinking about that stuff. Like I said, 10 years ago or so, still thinking I was indestructible and would be able to do whatever I wanted to do forever. I'm at the age now where we're gradually, as you get older, things start to be taken away. That could be a dear friend that passes prematurely. That could be, something, athletic that you used to be able to do. And well, guess what? It's, that's just not in the cards anymore. And you start to think about what's important. What's most important to me now is that when somebody thinks of Chuck Frydenborg, they think of somebody who they can trust, who they can believe in, and that made a positive impact on their lives. I look back now, and there were so many things that I cared about that that would happen, and it would shape how I felt and how I reacted towards others in the days subsequent to that. And it was all stuff that didn't matter. I mean, look, I take my responsibility to everyone at MarketMuse and our investors and our board. I take my responsibility to them so seriously. It was the professional honor of my life when I was asked to move into this role after having been at the company 2 years. I don't know that I could claim that I spent a lot of time aspiring to be a CEO, because I didn't. But I guess if I ever thought it would happen, I thought I would be hired and I would go to some place to have that role, to have people take the measure of me for 2 years, get to know me, see me at my best, see me at my worst, and based on that experience say, you're the guy. It's something that touched me that day and still does. But at the end of the day, and the reason I share that is as much as I am so strongly focused on leading MarketMuse to the potential we all see for it, whenever that day comes when I pass, the people that sit around and talk about me aren't going to be going, he really did a great job leading MarketMuse. Right? I mean, that's not going to be the conversation. At least I sure as heck hope it isn't.
Yeah.
What they're going to be talking about is how my relationship made them, their relationship with me made them feel. How I gave them comfort when they needed it, how I supported them during difficult times. Those are the things that I prioritize more than anything else. It's my relationships.
That's awesome. I think that's the perfect segue. So we're done. We're done with the questions. Well, at least the rapid fire questions. I think it was really insightful just to get to know. I think one of a few of the things that you prioritize in your life right now, and some of the hardships that you've encountered that provided that perspective. Talk us through a little bit, about your background, and we don't have to go too deep into it all, like not every single thing on your resume, but obviously you've been a sales executive for quite a while now, and before stepping into this role as the CEO 18 months ago. What was your professional journey like before being approached for the CEO role? Just walk us through what that looked like and what you were aspiring to be, and kind of like what were your personal goals within that space of what you felt like you had a lot of domain expertise in.
And I'm smiling a bit because it's taking me back a bit to the anecdote you just shared about Tom Hanks and what he would tell his 18-year-old self.
Yeah.
If I sat down with my 18-year-old self, I would say, chill out, be patient, and believe.
Yeah.
And the reason I say that is because I think, and I've seen this as a parent, people figure things out at different times. And I know we've all got this schedule in our heads of the way things are supposed to work out. And I think for the vast majority of us, when we say this is how we know it's going to be, God laughs. Right. And I didn't know what I wanted to do when I grew up. I went to college. I wasn't ready. I didn't take it seriously. I got through it, but spent way too much time focused on the wrong stuff. And I remember sitting with my stepfather, and I was watching friends of mine, having these companies come on campus, and they were doing these interviews and they were getting jobs left and right. And I wasn't even interviewing because I had no clue. What I wanted to do. And I remember sitting with my stepfather, and he said at the time, he's like, hey, I'm 60 and I don't know what I want to do when I grow up. And he was right. I so much at the beginning of my career was happenstance. I I was living in Stamford, Connecticut, and I started working. And I started working for a recruiting company.
Okay.
And I hated it. I hated every part of it. But there was this up and coming, rapidly growing company in town, and I got the account, and it was at the time called Gartner Group.
Okay.
And I called Gartner. I said I had a great candidate, and they said, "Who?" And I said, "Me." I just wanted to work somewhere that had a ton of opportunities and would allow me to figure things out. And I got a job there. It was an administrative job. And I mentioned earlier, I used to play a lot of sports.
Yeah.
Was playing on the basketball team at Gartner, was playing on the softball team, and got along with everybody there. And they seemed just like me, but they were driving much nicer cars and living in much nicer places, and they were all in sales. And so I was like, wow, maybe I could do that. They didn't seem smarter than me or anything. It was like, and so I asked, and everybody laughed. They're like, you kidding me? People that come and sell here, they've got, 5 to 10 years proven sales experience at IBM, Xerox, what have you. And I was like, all right, well, what do I need to do? And they told me, you got to go to the research side of the business, familiarize yourself with the tech issues our clients are dealing with all the time. Then we got to slide you into some kind of client facing role. And I'll bet you anything, Chris, that they all thought I was going to just go away. But I didn't. I worked in the research side of the business for a couple of years. Then I moved over to the client service organization. And they finally had a sales territory open in northern Jersey, small to mid-size enterprises, and the territory was empty. And I was like, well, give me a shot. And long story short, first 6 months, I fell flat on my face. I had no idea what it meant to not only be a sales professional, but what it meant to be a professional. And I had a new manager come in to lead the group. His name is Peter Persico, and he's still a friend of mine to this day. We're close. And he said, we had 13 people on the team last year, 12 made club, and there was you. I'd fire you if I had your replacement. I'll give you 6 months.
Wow.
And I just made a decision that if I was going to get fired, and I expected I was going to get fired, that I was going to walk away if that happened with peace. That there would be no couldas or shouldas or woulda. God, if I'd only done this. And I wasn't very good, but I outworked my mistakes.
Yeah.
And out of I don't know at the time, but a couple hundred account reps, which was the junior sales role there, I finished second.
Wow.
And that was it. It was like, wow, I can do this. And I'm learning every day. I'm getting better. And I had, I guess it was 3.5 years as an individual contributor. They then moved me into a sales leadership role, and I never looked back. I love leading. I love coaching. I love seeing somebody and seeing their potential, a potential that they don't see. Yeah. And working with them and then watching, it sounds hokey, but watching their dreams come true. Yeah. I found something that I just so enjoyed, and it's afforded me, opportunities. First at Gartner, larger sales teams, larger responsibility. I then left Gartner. God, it's been a long time now. So much of my heart is there. I was there 20 years, close. Okay. Went to Rosetta Stone to actually start a corporate sales organization there. Okay. They were doing, it was primarily B2C, but they had groups that were focused on government and education. They brought me in to build out a sales team to sell into corporations. Over over about 3 years, we built that from 0 to about 17 million. And I was there for another 3 years, and that's when I moved into content optimization. Actually jumped to lead global sales at a Berlin-based company called Acrolinks, which was, again, a wonderful experience, because in addition to the sales background, which at that point I really felt I was ready to learn more and accept new challenges, I picked up a lot more operational skills, marketing skills, and frankly international experience, which up until that point I really didn't have. And that led me in 2018 to join MarketMuse. They were just about ready at that point to become have a real B2B sales organization. And I saw the power of their product and the quantified value it could create. And I knew they were going to be successful. And I joined there. And as I briefly mentioned earlier, my first full year here, we doubled revenues year over year. The pandemic happened, and then they asked me to move into this role. So I just covered a lot of years in a few minutes. But yeah, that's good and bad.
Yeah. No, I think that's great. I mean, I think to me, out of all of that, it's the moment that things start clicking, right? So that's 6 months at Gartner when you're talking about you basically looked at that was like a death sentence. You had 6 months before, maybe this comes from a sports background, I'm not sure, but the mentality of going into that situation, knowing and accepting the fact that your fate is most likely termination, right? But making sure that you leave everything on the court to a certain degree, right? It's but leaving everything that you could possibly can, right? So there's no excuses. At the end of the day, if you get fired, you get fired. That you know you gave it everything that you had, and this is just not the path for you. But not everybody does that. Not everybody thinks like that. What I'm curious. Yeah, what do you remember? That what you were thinking? I mean, I'm sure obviously when your boss had told you you're the one out of the 13 that didn't make the cut, obviously is one thing. That's got to do something to you psychologically. And then, and then at that point, I think a lot of people could just very easily okay, I'm just going to quit, or I'm just going to accept my fate and then move on, right? And probably would just never have gone down this path of sales. But something different about you where you I am that one of 13 that didn't, the only one out of the 13 that didn't make it. And then you ended up becoming the second out of a few hundred 6 months later. I mean, how did that happen? And do you remember what you were thinking, feeling, going through during those times? Because I think a lot of people reach these inflection points like that, and they have a path to choose. And I'd say majority will take that path of, again, just least resistance. And you chose the path of most resistance.
It's a great question. And it's so funny. I'm sitting here. I don't know what my facial expression is like, but I just haven't thought about any of this in so long.
Yeah.
But I was this fractured person, and I don't mean that in terms of wounded. I mean two different people, right? I was the individual that lettered in 3 sports in high school, was highly competitive, worked to get better every day, and every time I walked onto the field or the court, I did so with confidence. And then there was professional Chuck, who had no confidence at all, no feeling of self-worth, did not feel like he belonged. And that was not only professional Chuck, but that had been academic Chuck.
Mm-hmm.
Right? So you had this one area of my life where I walked in just with conviction, knowing that I could get whatever I needed to get done, that I could come back, that I could win, that I could grind it out, whatever expression you want to use. And then I had academic and professional Chuck that had none of that conviction and none of that confidence. And I just, what I felt, and I thank him for it to this day. And in fact, when I got when I was named CEO, my first phone call was Pete.
Wow.
And I was like, if it wasn't for you, this never would have happened. And he was like, I can't believe it happened at all. But anyway,
Yeah,
yeah,
he's probably pulling your strings, man. I mean, I'm sure you saw it, he knew it.
Friend. But that conversation with him where, 12 people had made club, I didn't. I remember that week being in the empty office because everybody was wherever they were, on the beach somewhere. And it was the first time that disappointment, where I allowed myself to get angry, like I had just underperformed and screwed up a play.
Yeah.
It was the first time I let myself get angry in an environment where I had never previously expected that much of myself. And there was a resolve that was born of that circumstance that allowed me to attack the job like I had always attacked the game. And then all of a sudden you start having success. And it's mixed in with fear. That fear doesn't go away. That takes a long time.
Yeah.
But things started to turn. And
That's
I think it starts with, as I'm resolving this in my head talking to you, I think it started with, for the first time, me having high expectations of myself in that environment, where before I just let myself off the hook. Well, you didn't do well because you suck.
That is the nugget. That is the nugget that I feel like this is the takeaway of this entire conversation, is that part. There's so many people I think out there that have been like, you talk about that dichotomy between personal and professional, and that personal could be, again, like a certain realm, certain comfort zone, whether that's sports or even academics, and then vice versa. I think like from academics and then even like social adoption and adaptation to different environments that you're uncomfortable in. That challenge of knowing what you're comfortable with and what you can excel at, but then like trying to push yourself in other environments is so critical to becoming a complete person.
Yeah.
Right? Like it's not just being great at one thing or being great at another, but you have to find all those components to be great at life. And I think like that's really amazing when you're talking about that. Like I got goosebumps from it. You can't help, when you talk to people, it's just like those are the things that come up. These are the emotions that come up. And I do feel like there's a lot of people out there that probably feel frustrated or feel like that sense of like lack of self-worth in those situations where that's got to be super frustrating, because in this other area of life they excelled. I mean, you think about professional athletes that like end up with a career-ending injury, but never had that confidence, never pursued to achieve that confidence academically or professionally. Like, there's a lot of those stories, and that's sad but it's great that you picked that up young. Diving into like, I think, becoming the CEO and that day, now that, we kind of sped up through joining MarketMuse, what was those first 2 years at MarketMuse like? What inspired you to join them in the first place? And then ultimately, why did you feel like, obviously it's a great validation, is a great speaking to the, again, you're talking about the visibility and the trust that, the board or the other former leaders are, are putting into you, seeing the skill set, seeing, the work that you've done, and making that choice of tapping you on the shoulder for the role. But why did you choose to accept the role? Like, there's got to be, outside of like the validation, like that feel good of that belief, there's got to be some underlying thing there where you feel like I can do this and I can bring these values and this, I know I can build this, I can make this bigger and better. So what were the things about the product, about the business itself that drew you to it?
I think what drew me, when we had that offsite meeting, and the result of the offsite was, a show of hands around the room saying, this is, Chuck, will you do this? I think there were a number of things. Number one, yeah, I'm a very different person than the person we were just talking about a few minutes ago.
Yeah.
And at that moment, I did have confidence that not only would that if I did the job, not only would I do okay, but I thought I would do well. I also, and I meant this when I said this before, to have that entire group say that was what they felt was the best thing for the company. There's a responsibility that comes with that. And I felt an immediate and desperate need to fulfill the expectations they had of me that led us all to that moment. I'll also share that I think, MarketMuse, we're having a super candid conversation.
Yeah.
I felt like the product itself was incredibly strong, and it still is. But that we had suffered from an inability to focus and to have discipline around our execution. And I don't mean that as a criticism of my co-founders. I mean, they're both friends of mine. But I think they would admit, if they were on this call with us, that they did what a lot of co-founders do, where they identified a business issue and then they started building a platform. And as they built that platform, they wanted it to do everything. They wanted it to solve every problem.
Of course. Yeah.
And often when you focus on everything, you're really focusing on nothing. And I did see an opportunity for us as a company to put a stake in the ground on prioritization and focus, and then do what I have done throughout my career, which is get a plan in place, get maniacally disciplined around it, and go execute. So, I don't know, we could probably talk for another hour about whether about what I felt about my performance in the job. But to me, the most critical elements of what the job demanded now were the things I knew how to do. I absolutely brought gaps in my skill set and experience to the role. I feel bad every time I meet with product and engineering, because they got to dumb it down for me a little bit. I learn every day, and that's been, honestly, Chris, that's been the most wonderful part of this last year and a half. I have grown more and developed more and learned more in the last year and a half than I have at any juncture in my career prior. So those were kind of all my feelings, and that's kind of what's happened since in the last 18 months.
That's awesome. Yeah, as you're saying all that stuff, I feel like there's a quote from somebody I'd spoken to a few episodes back, but the idea of like great leaders are actually just great servants, like to a certain degree, right? Which is, it's the humility of knowing what you're strong at and what you're weak at, and trying to identify that same strengths and weaknesses in other people, and how do they complement the overall team, and then helping to support others' weaknesses in a lot of ways. And we all have them. Exactly. Yeah. Awesome. Last question here, because we're rounding up on the hour, is the idea of, where you think MarketMuse will be in the next 5 years. 5 years from now, a lot of things can happen, obviously. Do you think like this is in 5 years, you want to take it to a place of, having a successful exit, taking it to an IPO would be great, taking it to, just keeping it private, and then just, reaching to the full potential of what the company can do in 5 years? Any thoughts on that?
What I'll say is I want to reframe it a little bit, if you'll allow me.
Of course.
Just like when you're in sales, right? If you approach the job at the first day of a year with, okay, I'm going to go make my number.
Yeah.
Right. That can't be the goal. Yeah. Right. The goal has to be doing the right thing the right way, understanding the activities that are involved that will ensure your success, and then executing them every day to the best of your ability. When I look at MarketMuse in 5 years, first, Chris, I'll be 63. God, Yeah. But what I'm trying to do right now is not focus on what's that brass ring out there,
Yeah.
but more right now focus on what are the activities that we need to do that will ensure our success, and focus on those. And just like when I was an individual contributor in sales or running a team in sales, and I said to myself or my team all those times, if we just focus on doing things the right way, we're going to come up for air in 365 days, and we're going to be where we need to be. We'll be past that.
Yeah.
That's kind of the mindset I'm looking at for MarketMuse right now. Now, having said that, 5 years from now, I think the most likely scenario for us is we continue to scale. We came out of the pandemic last year. We grew 45% year over year.
Wow.
We've done so with, frankly, limited resources. I see an immediate opportunity for us to accelerate that growth in the years to come. And yeah, I think probably the most likely scenario is whether it's 2 years, 5 years, or someplace in the middle. At some point, somebody's going to be like, wow, look at that technology, look at that client base, and we'll get that exit. But that's not where my head's at right now.
Yeah, I agree. Yeah, it's a loaded question. So I always ask it in that framework, but then I think like you get a sense of who the individual is, because I think at the end of the day, you got to love process and not the destination.
Yeah, and right now the process, I'm having a blast. I really am, and I'm sure that's come across.